morning, everyone.
Morning. Morning.
It's good to see some familiar faces, and I'm anxious to get introduced to those of you who I don't know and maybe should know, because it's been a while since I've been hanging around town. But I appreciate this opportunity to be here this morning, to be back in the town where I grew up, and to share some thoughts and ideas about what transpired to make this book come about, and also to share a little bit of history about the Northeast Fire Department. Now, I wasn't sure who might show up today. I'm very happy that some of my brother firefighters are here. I really wasn't expecting to see any of these three guys, so I'm glad you guys are here for nothing else but moral support, and also to be my fact checker, because I may bring something up. And as I wrote this book, I discovered that I had a lot of fact checkers, because once I put the book out there, my sister called me on a couple things like, you know, that's not exactly right, that you should have checked with me or whatever. But it wasn't significant except to our family, or maybe something in my coaching I might mention and somebody would say that, well, that's not exactly the way it went. Ones that I held my breath on were someone like my good friend Brian Davis here, who has a part in the book. When I wrote it and put it out there, I waited for him to say, yeah, that sounds exactly how it went down. So, again, it's an honor and a privilege to be back here to share my book and hopefully a little bit of history about the Northeast Fire Department. And I'm in the process of, you know, in April it'll be 1 year since I launched the book, and I'm still trying to sell books. That wasn't the reason for writing the book. It was to get my memoirs and my story out there to people, and if for nobody else but my immediate family and friends, the people that I shared in the book, for them to have a perspective on where I saw our relationship. But I want to emphasize that word relationship. I want to talk about that today, because all of this experience that brought together my story as a firefighter, as a chief, as a coach, came about because of relationships. I can go back to a day in time where I can note that this relationship started or that relationship started. And on the way out here, I was thinking, now currently, after I transcended beyond the scope of this book, and this may be my next book, I got involved in church ministry at Our Lady of Peace in Erie. And one exercise that we do with our confirmation kids is called the timeline. And we have them write out, and I show them a map of my timeline from the time I was born, getting married, in the fire department, into senior living, all that stuff. And then I ask them to look back and reflect on that. For me, in this story, I have a specific date that set me on a totally different trajectory. I grew up in Northeast Township. I lived up on what we call the side hill. Those of you who've been around a whole lifetime, you know exactly where I'm talking about. Some people call it Orton's Hill. It's the side hill. But we had a splendid view on Smith Road of the lake, the sunsets, Canada, and the town. And it proved to be a wonderful setting. My father moved my mom and my siblings out to Northeast and bought a ramshackle farmhouse and remodeled it, and you know, I spent a good deal of my life right there. And as a kid, overlooking the town, I really got enthralled with the fire department because I had a bird's eye view. So when the fire horn would blow, I'd be on the lookout. There go the gray trucks. On my bicycle I went, and off I went chasing the fire trucks. I can't tell you how many times Liam Priester said to me, Mr. Meyers, you get in the way and your dad's going to be having a talk with you. Okay? But I was there. Anytime I could get near one of the Crescent or Fuller Hose trucks, I was there. And so I wanted to be a fireman, and I wanted to be in the Fuller Hose Company. Now again, I don't want to go into a lot of details that are in my book, because I'm hoping that you'll have enough interest that maybe you'll want to buy or borrow a copy, but I wanted to see the fire department in action. July 3rd, 1970. That's the day it all began. As I said, I wanted to be in the Fuller Hose Company, but I was not 21 years old. I was 17. And so I found out there was an opportunity to join the Greenfield Fire Department at age 17, so I joined. Even though I lived in Northeast Township, I joined Greenfield. These last 55 years in the volunteer fire service, as I said, have led to some amazing relationships. And I got to serve in 3 separate volunteer fire departments: Greenfield, Northeast, and Westridge Fire Department. 50 years ago at the Greenfield Fire Hall, I met my wife Nancy. We had our wedding reception there, and we celebrated many parties, including last April when I decided to launch the book. That's the site I used for my book launch, back where it all began. The other extremely memorable experience for me being in the volunteer fire service was being elected to the position of fire chief, a position that I held for 9 years. And in my lifespan, 9 years doesn't seem like that long, but because of all the things that transcended out of that and continue today, I'm very blessed to have been put in that position. Last April, at my book launch, all of this was a surprise. Nobody that came to this event had any idea what I was about to do. So they didn't know there was a book, they didn't know the title. But I was blessed to find an interview that I did with Jet TV, because some of the firefighters will tell you that I got to be what they called the talking chief. I would talk to the news media, and so they would seek me out at a fire, and I know guys like Terry McIntosh said, oh, there's Darrell talking on the TV again, okay? But I took that opportunity because I thought it was a good way to promote the fire department, and I think people have a right to know the facts rather than, you know, one of the things that bothers me about fire and police officials is they don't want to give anything to the media. There's information you can share. We even have a position now in Incident Command called the Information Resource Officer who's supposed to give this stuff out. So I was a friend and the media was a friend to me. So as a prelude to the book, I want to share with you, because back at the launch time, people had no idea what I was about to reveal. And the punchline is actually at the end of the video. So I want to share that with you right now.
From Northwestern Pennsylvania's #1 news station, this is Action News at 6.
Good evening, everyone. That's right, great. We'll have our Sunday Health Report when we come to Chautauqua County, New York. Firefighters from Westfield, Asheville, Chautauqua, Mayville, Panama, Ripley, South Ripley, and Findlay Lake were called to put out the fire. Officials from the Chautauqua County Sheriff's Department say the barn's owned by Edward Carutis. The Carutis family resides on Stebbins Road. Officials at the scene say the barn is a total loss. No injuries were reported. There were some horses in the barn at the time of the fire, but they were removed safely. The longtime fire chief of the Northeast Fire Department is leaving his post. Chief Darrell Meyers must step down from his position after deciding to move to Mill Creek Township. But as Jen Campanella reports, the veteran firefighter hopes he can be of some help to his new community.
This Northeast fire chief closes one chapter in his life, he opens another. Darrell Meyers has served that community for 14 years. Due to employment opportunities, Meyers and his family are changing locations to Mill Creek. Therefore, he must resign from the position. But it's not the end of his career, only a high point. Through the years at Northeast Fire Department, Meyers holds some memorable experiences.
As far as fires are concerned, probably the most memorable one in my book as fire chief
will be the Delhurst fire, which later proved to be an arson fire. I'd say that as far as my overall career, not just being chief, probably the most memorable fire to the town of Northeast and myself, because I was there as a member of Greenfield Fire Department assisting Northeast, was the fire in 1977 at St. Mary's Seminary, which is now Mercyhurst College. It was a $4 million fire, and it completely devastated 2 upper floors of the college, and yet it remains intact.
Meyers plays many roles as husband, father, grandfather, teacher, mentor, and of course, firefighter. Despite the fact he has made a difference to many people and saved many lives, he is modest.
And that's really hard to say, Jen, how much difference does one individual make? It's really not something that you look at as far as the whole team effort. I would not have been able to do the job as fire chief without the 65 men and women that make up the Northeast Fire Department, and I'm certainly going to miss them the most because of their hard work and dedication.
When the move is completed, Meyers plans to share his efforts again and serve the Mill Creek community.
I'll definitely get back involved with the volunteer service. As soon as we're able to complete the transaction of selling our home and moving, I plan to, if they'll have me, join the Westridge Hose Company out in Mill Creek and stay active as a fireman and as a first responder, and who knows, maybe someday I'll have an opportunity to be an officer again.
To celebrate the peak of his career, Meyers is planning to write a book about his experiences sometime in the near future. Jen Campanella, Jet TV Action News at 11.
Give me 1 second while I just change gears. Put the clicker on here. First time I've tried to run that video on Bluetooth, and because it's only from here to there, but you saw the skip versus the audio, but I think you got the general gist of that. Oh. Just a slide that I threw in there last summer. We were at a parade in Finley Lake. I had an opportunity to have my picture taken with that's my first pumper. When I got in Greenfield Fire Department, that was truck 1. We only had 4 trucks, so it was 1, 2, 3, 4. We didn't have 3-digit numbers, and chiefs didn't have a number. We had a truck, and that was truck 1, and that's the truck I was weaned on as a firefighter. I'm very thankful Greenfield still has it. It's an antique display piece, but I have 100,000 stories just on that truck alone. But it was my first fire truck. But what I wanted to share with you, this is a quote directly from the book about why I wrote the book. In the introduction, I said it's incumbent upon us to harvest the wisdom we have gained during the first half of life in order to sow the seeds from the second half of life. And as I'm writing this book, I was fully aware that I'm in the second half of life, and it's fast approaching the 4th quarter right now. Recalling the stories that make us and which have made us who we are sets the context for educating and sharing with others. But it isn't simply recalling the stories about the good old days. Rather, it's the ability to touch lives and lived experiences of others that bring it alive in the present through the past. So I'm not just trying to boast and tell my stories. I'm hoping that the young firefighters and the young coaches and even the young athletes can learn from some of the tidbits that I've put into this book. That's the intent, and my hope is that the younger aspiring leaders of our culture will learn from them. Again, I don't want to repeat. Mr. Davis here is in the book, and as a young explorer firefighter, like me, riding my bike chasing the trucks, he was chasing after the fire department. And I was very blessed to be able to work with him in his apprenticeship of fire service. And I think we did some awesome things together. And again, another relationship that's been lifelong just from that point. So as an example. A little bit about the Northeast Fire Department. Established in 1885, we just finished celebrating 140 years of service to the community. In today's environment, it is still a strong standing volunteer organization, which is no easy task. I'm sure you've read, I'm reading a lot about volunteer fire departments across the state and across the country that are closing their doors because they can't get enough help or they can't get enough money or both. And departments are merging, they're closing, they're going to partial paid, partial volunteer, some totally rolling into full paid. Just had an opportunity to talk with some firefighters out on Anna Maria Island last week, and the paid department is looking to move into the abandoned volunteer department on the south end of the island because they only have one station out there now, and 5 guys just can't cover that whole island. The Northeast community is extremely blessed to have the fire department that we do and its special uniqueness. Now, I'm sure there would be other chiefs or other members of the department who say, well, you're no better than us or you're no different than us. But I think if you live in Northeast, you know the flavor of our community. We have a special community. I still call myself as one, even though I live in Mill Creek the last 26 years. I'm a Northeast boy, born and raised here, okay? And it will always be my home. And Tom, you can help me on this because I did check with Jack DeRazio to see, we weren't sure, but when I got involved and when I got to be the senior man, one of the blessings we had was that employers here, like Welch's, Electric Materials, Ridge Rack, would not only allow the men to leave to go out on a call, but they paid them. Okay, so it was like having a paid department. I could leave a job at Welch's, go out and fight a fire and not worry about, oh, my wife's going to be mad because we got to cut back on the groceries, I missed 3 hours of work. No, they paid them, okay? Jack wasn't sure if that's still happening today. I don't know if it is, but he also told me that we have very few people, volunteers, coming out of those businesses. But for many, many, many years, if it still isn't a practice, it was one of the things that gave people like me as the fire chief peace of mind, okay? I never saw it, but I heard stories about Mr. Newbold, Pat Newbold's dad, when he had the meat shop. Fire horn would blow and he would go running to the station with his meat apron still on. I remember Monty Lowe's coming from the post office, seeing him as I was riding with my bike, running for the station. Many business owners, farmers, being right here, able to drop what they're doing and go and answer the call. We have many firefighters over the years that work for the borough or work for the township, and certainly they were able to answer the call. So it's interesting to note, and I go into some detail, I think, on this, about this in my book, because a lot of times people would say to me, oh, you belong to Fuller Hose, so you're the chief of Fuller Hose? No, I'm the chief of the Northeast Fire Department. Well, how's that happen? Yeah, just by sheer luck. The fire chief is appointed by the borough. The fire department gets to elect their nominee, but when Fuller Hose nominated me and the 2 departments elected me, if the borough council would have said, the last guy we want as fire chief is Darrell Meyers, it wouldn't have happened, okay? So myself or Tom Huber, before we started the job, we had to have the blessing of borough council. And it started with Mr. Lewis Turner Card, better known as LT Card. He was the first fire chief, and he was appointed by borough council. He wasn't even a member, but he was appointed to be the chief over both departments, charged with managing both companies because, as Tom said before the presentation, because they couldn't get along, all right? And there's a lot of history stories about the bickering and stuff back and forth. But that was not unique to Northeast. If you go back and study the history of volunteer fire departments in the U.S., there was a stipend paid by insurance companies to the fire department to put the fire out. And so the Aetna Hose Company would try to beat the Pioneer Hose Company to the fire so they could get the stipend. And so they'd block the road, or they'd cut their hoses, or, I mean, it was cutthroat, okay? I don't think the Crescents and the Fullers were that bad back in the day, but it sounds to me like in 1934, things were pretty bad, and Borough Council said, we're putting a chief in. And so since that day, whenever a chief gets elected by the two fire departments, the final blessing has to come from Borough Council. And to my knowledge, I've never heard of one being rejected, but I do remember being reminded by a Borough Council member or two maybe that, you know, we gave you the blessing, we can take it away, all right? It didn't happen very often. Chief Card was also instrumental in developing and launching the Cherry Festival parade and the festival itself. And so, you know, he was the first one. And fortunately, many of us got to follow in his lineage. And I don't have, and I was just talking with a couple of the firemen here, I didn't have a complete list of chiefs, but there are some that are notable to me. Because I knew them, I worked with many of them, or I have some history with them. For some of you who've been around a while, some of these names may be familiar. Don Bogert, Monty Lowe's, Clarence Hutchison, Chief Huber, Jerry Bailey, who was my predecessor, and then many other ones. But I didn't make a total list. But some of these names stand out. And Tom, I just happened to have grabbed that from before. I had a long time ago from the Historical Society, and I thought this was a great place to bring that in. And I wanted to lead up to this. Yes, my book is titled, They Called Me Chief, but they didn't call me king. I was not some big, powerful authority. I was the leader of the band, okay? I get to direct the group. And I think it's important. I don't know if any of you are following the controversy that's going on in Mill Creek Township, where I live now. There's controversy because the township hired they've established a paid department. We still have the volunteer departments, but in unison they're developing a paid department, and they hired a full-time paid chief who lives in Ashtabula, Ohio. Okay? And he's commuting to work. And there's a lot of flack about that. And I don't necessarily agree with that flack, okay? Because I believe that location doesn't matter. The organization, training, trust, and true leadership makes the difference. When I was nominated to be chief, the first thing I said to my brother firefighters was, wait a minute, hold it, time out here, guys. You're used to a Jerry Bailey or a Tom Huber being here in town. You guys know I work out of town. I go to Buffalo, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and I go all over the place. And they said, that's fine. With our structure of assistant chiefs and the job we know you're going to do, we'll be fine. And we were fine, okay? Because my job was to make sure that all the protocols were in place, the I's were dotted, the T's were crossed, the training was done, and I could leave comfortably knowing that all was well. Now, because it was a new transition, Tom, if I may pick on you, Chief Huber, who was also the police chief at the time, which was very handy, and we were still doing our own dispatch, we worked out a radio code system so that when I left, I would let the operator know I'm out of commission, don't bother trying to find me. And when I would come back, I would radio that I was back in service. And many times I remember pulling up to the toll gate at Ripley, getting on the radio and saying, you know, I'm back in service. Quickly followed by the radio operator saying, "Thanks, Chief, can you call the station, or Chief Huber would like you to stop by on your way home." So there was a message, there was something that came up that, you know, needed to be taken care of. One of the things I did learn that they didn't tell us in the fire department, this was a well-kept secret by the past chiefs, was that there's a lot of stuff that comes up that they don't call out the guys, they don't call anybody else, and if they don't know who to call, they call the chief at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I got to work my way through all of that. Some notable fires in Northeast history, and also notable to me because I saw or participated in many of these. Hardware store fire. I remember that because, again, at my bird's eye perch up on the Smith Road, we were having a family celebration the day that fire broke out, and we saw it from our living room window. And my Uncle Joe, who was a police chief over in Gowanda, New York, said, "Let's go take a ride." And my dad said, "You probably won't get anywhere near there." And my Uncle Joe, being a chief, said, "I'll get us in." And I don't know what he said to the fire police, but we did get, like, over to where Ridge Direct's parking lot was, where we could go in there. And I was able to walk by, and a visual memory I have still to this day on that fire was seeing Clarence Hutchison on the old American La France pumper running the controls, and that truck just beating its heart out, flowing water. The Glecker warehouse fire, Welch's fire, that warehouse fire that we had, the ammonia leak, Tom? I remember that very, very well because I was still in Greenfield, and we were called to assist. And I remember coming down, and Chief Tom Huber gave me my first assignment. Before our crew was assembled, they needed some help up on the roof. And so that one was very near and dear to my heart, as well as was the St. Mary's fire. And as I said in the video, I was still in Greenfield that night, and that is a fire that any firefighter who had anything to do with that will remember that one always and forever. But those were just a few of the fires. Some other notable incidents. I mentioned the Delhurst fire in the video. I did put that in there because that was under my watch. But in the second month after I was officially placed in the position of chief, we had a massive multi-vehicle pileup at 2 o'clock in the morning up on Interstate 90 that involved multiple semis, one fatality, and a few cars, and it was in a horrific snowstorm. And I remember calling out to the responding units to come the wrong way, come west on the eastbound lanes. And our protocol at that time, and I hope it still is, when an officer gave you an order to do something contrary to what made sense, you were to repeat it back and he was to acknowledge. And so I remember a couple of the trucks saying, "Chief, are you sure you want us to come westbound and eastbound lane?" Yes. And it was one of the operators said, "Why?" I said, "You'll see when you get here." One semi in the middle had a load of lumber. It looked like somebody took a toothpick box and just, and there was a truck with Welch's juice boxes. That one was all over the place. And there were trucks jackknifed. The driver that was killed, his truck jackknifed. The guy coming behind him had 2 huge steel coils. And when he hit that truck, he just literally went through his cab, but one of the steel coils came off and laid there on the road. And so that road was not going to get open for a long, long, long time. I think it was closed for 16 hours before they got it lifted. So that was, you know, my first baptism by snow, not by fire. May of 1990. Because of the fact that I was a volunteer forest fire warden, I was called to see if I could assemble a crew to come down to Tionesta, Pennsylvania, where they were on a very large forest fire. And as a chief, but also as a forest fire warden, I was able to take 6 volunteers from Northeast and 1 from Greenfield who happened to be on a forestry hotshot crew. And we went down to Tionesta and spent from 5 o'clock one afternoon till 7 o'clock the next morning out in the forest, not a grass fire, but out in the Allegheny National Forest fighting a major forest fire. And I've been on grass fires and brush fires, but I remember us coming over a mountain and seeing nothing but fire, like you would see in a movie. And I remember my friend Randy, who'd been out west to Idaho and Montana on major forest fires, and he looked at me and he said, "Holy crap, I've never seen anything like this." I was like, "Oh, hold it down. You've not seen anything like this? What the heck are we doing here?" Okay? But it didn't turn out to be that bad. But again, because of relationships and opportunity was something that I got to experience that I never dreamt that I would. So let's move into youth coaching. After I left Northeast, got into Mill Creek, I got involved in youth coaching. First I started in some faith formation ministry at our church, and found out that the high school boys CYO team needed a coach, and if they didn't come up with a coach, they were going to have to forfeit the season and not have a team. And so I volunteered to become the basketball coach. And then later on, I got invited to become the Fun Runners track and cross country coach. What's a fun runner? It's grades 1 through 4. And the first thing I said to the principal was, "Is this going to be like herding cats?" And she said, no, it's not like that at all. And it really wasn't. These little kids that came out for track and cross country were extremely, extremely motivated. But what prompted me to want to get involved with this? Man, I'm sure every one of you knew or know the name Ted Miller. Ted Miller was my coach. He was my physical education teacher at school, but he became my mentor and he became my friend. That's a picture of our team in 1970. On the far right, you see Coach Miller in the back and me kneeling in front. I was the team manager then. I did try out for basketball for JV, and I just wasn't a basketball player. The coach recognized that, and I recognized it. So when I had an opportunity to become a manager, I did that, and I was very blessed, and it really developed the relationship that Coach Ted and I had. Many of you may remember one of his proteges and a following coach, Jack Power. I didn't realize till just a few years ago that Jack had written a book about cross-country coaching, because he was a standout cross-country runner, and he went on to be a teacher, and at his school he has led, following in the footsteps of our mentor Ted Miller, he has led many championship teams, and he wrote a book, which was another thing in my mind. Like, okay, Jack wrote a book, and it was helpful to me. Okay, it was helpful. By the way, if you ever want to look it up, I was blessed as a coach to be able to have my team succeed and go to the state championship. One of the greatest experiences of my life. On the right side picture there are the 3 coaches. The gentleman on the far right is my oldest grandson, Corey. When I took the job, and I said I would be the coach, I gave Father David one condition, that my 2 grandsons could be my assistant coaches. I had the clearances, I had the keys. I knew a little bit about basketball, but I didn't really know the plays. I knew how to motivate the guys, but to direct them. And so Corey and my younger grandson, Craig, who's not in this picture, he was an assistant coach for 1 year, but then he had to move on because of his collegiate responsibilities. But this was my championship team. And that whole experience that weekend of going to Philadelphia and working our way up to runner-up position was just something I never dreamt would happen, and sadly have never been able to replicate.
Darrell?
Before COVID, and we discovered when we went to Philadelphia, I didn't know how big it was. Before COVID, in the Erie Diocese, we had 8 teams. We got down there and found out there was 26 teams in Pittsburgh and 42 teams in Philadelphia.
Wow.
That ended up being pared down to 12 teams that participated in this 3-day championship playoff. And out of all those, we made it to the number 2 position. And just phenomenal, phenomenal weekend. So that's it as far as slide prompts, but it's just a couple other comments and then I'll open it up for some Q&A. In my book, in addition to quotes from Coach Ted Miller, I included quotations from legendary coaches like Tony Dungy, John Wooden, Patricia Summit, and Megan Barrett. These are people that I read, followed, researched as a coach to learn more. I want to share something, a question, Terry, you asked me one day, many years ago. As I was going to fire schools and I was always going to this or that. And Terry said something to the effect like, why do you keep going to these schools? Haven't you learned enough? And I just felt like I could always learn more. And that's always been in my pit. I need to know more. I need to know more about this. And so over the years, whether it was in my profession as an insurance auditor, as a fire chief, a firefighter, I've been a state fire instructor, as a coach, I've tried to go out and find out somebody else's story and what can I learn from that? How can I take a piece of that? And my bookshelf, I'm hoping my grandson Corey takes it over someday after I'm gone, but I've got books from so many coaches and leadership people, and Brian has already read the book and he knows some of the names I picked out. I got to work with some of the greatest instructors in the world, but they were ours from Northwest Pennsylvania. And they were guys that I looked up to as I came up through the ranks. And to be able to be called one of them was such a notable thing. Again, I don't want to go on anymore. I may have used up my time already, but I want to open it to any other questions, comments. The fire department, feel free to interject or correct anything I said.
I have a couple questions
Sure.
for you. So how old, I know you don't know who I'm Barbara Finan. How old were you when you became chief in Northeast? Were you pretty young?
Yeah, I was
Like you must have been.
34, 35.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And do we still have, I didn't realize we would have like forest fire training in this area. Do we have firefighters that are trained in forest fire?
Yes.
Really?
And I've been extremely pleased now sitting in the bleachers watching, and thanks to the technology of Facebook and the internet, seeing how, especially the Fuller Hose Company, has gotten involved with some of the peers from the other volunteer departments and really gotten into the advanced training that the Bureau of Forestry offers. Pennsylvania offers a really great fire protection system. They have a chief forest fire warden in Warren, Pennsylvania, which we're under that jurisdiction. And they appoint volunteer wardens, guys like me. But a lot of times, volunteer fire departments didn't want to really hear about that or worry about it because they didn't ever see it. You know, I remember the first time I called my warden supervisor when I wanted to report what I called a major fire in Northeast. And he's like, you don't have forest fires or large grass or wildfires in Erie County. And I said, you want to come up and take a look? Because I counted it to be like 16 acres, which was significant to them. But that one down in Tionesta was over 1,200 acres. But yeah, our guys have, and gals have really stepped up and gotten into it and have all the latest training and equipment for it. And one of the things that Fuller Hose has always been way ahead on, I think the most popular vehicle has always been the grass fire truck, the Jeep, whatever we had, but we had a specialized vehicle just for grass and wildfires. Any other questions? If not, I thank you so much for the opportunity to share my story with you. I did bring some copies of the book. If you're interested, they are available. If you decide after today you don't want them, they are available locally over at the Historical Society. They have some over there. I was not able to get them into the local bookstore. I have them at Prest in Erie, and they are available on Amazon. But I also have them with me. They're normally $14.95. I didn't want to monkey around with dollars and nickels for change, so it's $15 if you have it. If you don't, I'll give you a book and I'll get the 15 from you later, or because I'm not into Venmo and that stuff. So. Thank you.